if you turn the wheel this way, I think the silly trailer should go. But I'm turning the wheel this way, and I'm looking at, if I could drive a tractor with a trailer hitch on the front and push the trailer into place, I could put one anywhere you want it put. But unless you adopt the worldview of the trailer, that thing's not going in that spot. And so when we start talking about strengthening our marriages and doing better in our marriages, it's the idea of not making you understand me, but me making the effort to understand you. Now, when you start talking about learning something, and I did this when I was a kid. I got to spend part of a summer in a cabinet shop. I really wasn't getting paid. I just was interested in woodworking. And this old gentleman said, hey, you can spend one day a week with me in my cabinet shop. It was John Rice's dad, John Brenton Rice, the guy who owned the property that Backwoods Christian Camp is built on. And so my 14th summer, I spent a couple of days a week that whole summer. And that was a cool experience. I'll get on the phone and call somebody. I got some interest in various and sundry things. And, hey, you have this business and you're doing this. Yeah. Hey, I'll give you a day of my time if I can come hang out with you. I spent a week with a ropes course building crew to learn how to build ropes courses. I spent some time with some tree cutting crews to see what kind of stuff they do with ropes that I don't do with ropes. And just the ability to say, hey, can I spend some time with you? When I wrestle, I use this move called a lockdown. If you get me in half guard, that means you're passing my guard. I catch one of your legs with both my legs and lock you down. Then I sweep you into a thing called a old school sweep, and then get into a dog fight, and then you're in trouble. But I learned the lockdown from the guy who invented the lockdown. I drove over to a place. This guy was giving a 6-hour seminar, and the guy who invented that move, So if you could learn from the expert in how to fix relationships, would that not be the guy to learn from? So if you take a guy who's got a relationship, and the relationship that he's in is absolutely diametrically incompatible. You think about the ultimate, we don't fit together, but I'm going to fix this relationship. Would you learn from that guy? This means yes. This means no. This means you're not voting. I think the most significant theological verse in the New Testament is John chapter 1, verse 14. John introduces the concept of the Logos. Not because these people don't know what the Logos is, but because they've got an idea. The Logos was the intellectual catalyst of the known universe. The Greeks threw that name around. It was their explanation for everything. And so John says, you want to talk Logos? I'll talk Logos. I'll give it a face. I'll give it a name. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. That's the word Logos. Anybody who's Greek in their thought process hears the intellectual catalyst of the universe. And now John's not only giving it a name, but John's giving it a face. And then in John chapter 1, verse 14, it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And if you look at that word specifically in Greek, and the Word became flesh and tabernacled among us. And that's just fun to say, tabernacled. Well, what was a tabernacle? What was a tabernacle? A tent. And that's all that word meant. You read the older translations, it'll be tabernacled, and we get this idea that it's this No, it was a word that meant big tent. The Word became flesh and lived in a tent with us. That's theologically significant. Because what happened is you've got my ways are higher than your ways, my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. We're incompatible to have a relationship with God because we can't ascend to that. But God descended to us. And God put on one of these things. God went camping. I did a youth rally in Missouri. They wanted me to talk about spiritual campers in a physical campground. God, the ultimate spirit, went camping. He came and he lived in one of these, and he could get hungry and he could get tired and he could have anxiety and he cried and he was despondent and he was betrayed and he was falsely accused and he was cheated on and he was doubted and he was picked on. All those kind of things that you want to talk about that can happen to one of these, the God of the universe said, I'll do that for 33 years. And so when you start talking about the ultimate example of attunement, The ultimate example of attunement is that God attuned with human beings. Look at Hebrews chapter 4. Verse 14. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into the heaven, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Well, you've got this high priest. And the Hebrew writer is trying to tell his audience, please, please, please don't quit Christianity and go back into Judaism. Because that's what was happening. They had grown up as Hebrews in the temple cultus, and they were part of that system, and they were trying to do this weird version of the covenant that wasn't working. You do realize that in first century Judaism, that's not covenant Judaism, right? I mean, that was a broken, failed system. Because what do you read in the New Testament? Passover, 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 Passover. And it's a big holiday. But the real holiday in Judaism was Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement may be referenced maybe 3 times in the New Testament. John the Baptizer will look at Jesus and say, behold the Lamb of God that takes away the sin of the world. Peter will talk about that Jesus is our propitiation, some overtones and some references to the Hilasteron, or the Ark of the Covenant mercy seat. Because see, on Day of Atonement, the priest put on special vestments, special garments. He took a blood sacrifice. He sprinkled it on the congregation. He walked through the holy place. Then he walked into the Holy of Holies. And when he walked into the Holy of Holies, he sprinkled the blood on the mercy seat, the golden cover of the covenant ark that had the 2 cherubim, the 2 winged figures, and he sprinkled the blood on the mercy seat. If you went into Herod's temple, you walked up those marble steps, and you walked through the sanctuary, and you passed the altar, and you went into the holy place, and then you went into the most holy place. Separating the holy place from the most holy place was a curtain. The curtain was as thick as a man's hand, not from palm to knuckles, but from little finger to thumb. And you parted that curtain, and you walked. That room was empty. There hadn't been an Ark of the Covenant in Israel in 600 years. And everything they were doing was useless because they could not get atonement. They couldn't have their sins rolled forward. They're waiting on a sacrifice that will fulfill all sacrifices. And that's what Jesus has done. Jeremiah 3:16 says, in those days you'll never think about the Ark of the Covenant. You won't mention it. You won't build another one. They hadn't had an Ark of the Covenant. What they were doing was pasted together baling wire and tape Judaism. There's no covenant authority for a Sanhedrin court. There's no covenant authority for a synagogue. And yet they're doing this stuff waiting on the Messiah. Well, the Messiah got here. The Pharisees didn't recognize him and they murdered him. And then these Jewish people who recognized him are now leaving him and going back. And the Hebrew writer says, look, why are you leaving this high priest? You've got a high priest that went to the heavens. And when Peter calls Jesus propitiation, he uses the Greek word for the Ark of the Covenant cover, the hilasteron. Jesus is the hilasteron. Jesus is the thing with the blood where the blood was sprinkled, and he presented that blood in the presence of God. You've got a high priest that has ascended into the heavens. Hold fast to that what you were. Don't give this up. And then he adds this, verse 15, for we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, and yet without sin. He said, you've got a high priest who has walked in your flesh, has experienced your experiences, who has even been tempted on every avenue that you could be tempted on, and he didn't sin. Now, the interesting part of this is you think if you see somebody who does something, he says, I did it, why can't you? Isn't that what we normally do? We kind of hold people to that standard. When I used to operate the ropes course, we'd have people climb up on high things and walk across these bridges. And you know, we told people it was challenged by choice. You don't have to do anything, but you need to look me in the eye and tell me, I choose not to do this, or I'm afraid to do this, but don't give me a bunch of Mickey Mouse excuses about why you can't. Okay? Say, I'm not going to do it. Well, sometimes I get in a mood and ask Ben about my mood sometimes, and I would go, you do realize that my 8-year-old daughter did everything on this course wearing flip-flops. And you're a grown man telling me you can't do this. I don't want to hear it. That's not how Jesus treats us. He says, you have a high priest who was tempted in every point like as we are, yet without sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. He said, Jesus understood your experiences. Jesus understood your shortcomings. Jesus understood your temptations. Jesus understood your stresses. And when you need help, you can come to Him in time of need. And Jesus is not going to say, I did it, why can't you? Jesus' response is going to be, I did it, you don't have to. Wow, that's attunement. I know what it's like to be weak or sad or scared or hurt or lonely or picked on or bullied or filled with anxiety or betrayed or falsely accused. And so if you want to learn how to be the ultimate connector in your relationship, the master of that was God. Because we're ultimately incompatible with God. And yet God said, you know what? Instead of trying to get you to be like me, ultimately that's His goal. He's going to make us holy. I'm going to be one of you. And then I can see the world from your perspective. I can attune to you and I can empathize. The old versions say sympathize with our weaknesses. NIV translates it as empathize with our weaknesses. I can see it from your standpoint. So when we start thinking about how to be better husbands, how to be better wives, how to be better spouses, how to be even better parents, the idea is instead of trying to convince people of our perspective, we learn their perspective. Now, I don't have to believe your perspective is reasonable. I don't have to believe your perspective is rational. I don't even have to agree with it. I've just got to demonstrate to you that I get it. I walk into a store and there's a guy in crisis and he's throwing canned beans at a dragon. I don't go, that's a big one. I don't pull my gun out and shoot at it. I go, sir, I can't see a dragon, but I bet if you see a dragon, it terrifies you to death. And guess what they all say? Yes. And when you get a yes out of anybody, you've aligned with them. Active listening builds empathy. Empathy builds rapport. Rapport builds influence. Influence creates behavioral change. That's what the FBI teaches. That's what every parenting class teaches, how to talk so your kids will listen, how to listen so your kids will talk. Mark Goldstein's book, Just Listen. All of those things based on the idea that I'm trying to demonstrate that I can see the world from your perspective. So when we start attuning to our spouses, it's basically not what does my control do to me, how does my control affect you? And so attunement is about literally learning your spouse's love language. Now, are you familiar with love languages? Yes, no, maybe, okay. So there's the idea that there is, and the love languages is the watered down chicken soup for the soul version of Jack Panskeep's research at the University of Kentucky, where he talks about the 7 emotional command systems in a primate. That there's these 7 different systems in our brains that when I'm in one of them, I feel more stimulated than I do in the others. And it's just the way we're wired. Some people, like well, he talks about the nester, the sensualist, the jester, the commander-in-chief, the energy czar, the explorer, and that when you're in that role, you feel more stimulated. Well, oftentimes we marry people, and they're stimulated by one thing, and we're stimulated by something else, and we don't get to do that. And so when I understand your love language, when I understand your mythos, when I understand what talks to you, what speaks to your heart, I've got to attune to that. And attuning to that is simply the idea that just because I say I love you this way, doesn't mean that that's the way you hear I love you. And I don't want to be creepy, and I don't want to give you bad images, okay? But I like to have my shoulders rubbed, all right? And I've got little bitty short stocky limbs, all right? I'm not a good boxer, and I don't dunk basketballs. I can do push-ups till you get bored. Okay, it's a short engine stroke. But because my muscles are bunchy, and when you rub my back, I want you to find a bone. I want you to squeeze juice out of them. I want you to try to make Lonnie juice when you rub my shoulders, right? And so guess how I rub your back? I get a hold of you and put this grip on you. One of the young cops told his wife, he says, I was doing jujitsu with Mr. Lonnie, And it was like he'd been shoeing horses since she was 4, okay? I've got a decent little grip for a little bitty guy. And so when I get a hold of your back, and guess what? My wife, how she likes to have her back rubbed? Gently. And guess how she rubs my back? It feels like a granddaddy long-legged spider river dancing on my shoulders. I said, what are you trying to do, irritate me to death? I rub her back like I like mine rubbed. She rubs mine like she likes hers rubbed. And all of a sudden, guess what's happening? We don't enjoy each other's back rubs. Well, if I have a love language and this speaks to me and I like gifts, I want you to give me gifts. And if I want you to give me gifts, what do I end up doing for you? Giving you gifts. And she'd rather me do some dishes or carry the trash out. Because her love language is acts of service. And if I'm missing that because I refuse to see the world from her perspective, I'm turning up her side of the bed, she's turning up my side of the bed, and we don't know we're affecting each other's side of the bed. And that's literally and figuratively, by the way, since we're in a room full of adults. All right? And so when you start talking about attunement, it's not just understanding my love language, it's understanding your love language. I don't have to give too much explanation, but I have a Kydex ninja sword. What I'm doing with the Kydex ninja sword has to do with some other things I've done professionally. I'm not a professional ninja. We had this obstacle on our obstacle course. You climb this pole, you balance on it, you pull this sword, and you ring a bell. Well, we decided to retire that element, and so I've got this ninja sword in my garage. Well, my grandson's over there, and he finds my ninja sword, and he starts wailing on my punching bag with it, because every little boy who picks up a ninja sword thinks he's a ninja. Well, I thought, why am I keeping a ninja sword in my garage? I don't actually need one. I don't carry one. I have a really nice pistol, so I'm not going to fight you with a ninja sword. So I decided, hey, I'll send Gunner, my grandson, my ninja sword. So I put it in a little tube. I get it all. And I think, oh, man, what about my granddaughter? So I call my daughter, Lonnie Beth. I say, hey, look, I'm sending Gunner a ninja sword. Do I need to send Sissy Bear a ninja sword? And she said, no, I'll just send her some lip gloss. And I nearly passed out. I said, what kind of parenting is going on over in Georgia where a granddaughter of mine would rather have lip gloss and a ninja sword? You have failed the test here. I said, you grew up, you didn't want to be Cinderella, you wanted to be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And now my little granddaughter Rhoda would rather have lip gloss and a ninja sword? I can't believe you failed as a parent. She said, Dad, do you want her to have what she wants, or do you want her to have what you want her to want? That's attunement. Do I want to address my wife's needs, my wife's wants, and smart money my wife likes? Or do I want to make her in my image that her needs look like my needs, her wants look like my wants, and her likes look like my likes? Well, if I try to force that on you, somebody's losing. And so when you make a compromise in your marriage, when you decide, well, I'm going to do this because they want to do it, I'm going to do this because he wants to do it, if it's giving in or giving up, somebody's keeping score, and typically the person who's keeping score always feels like they're losing. Am I wrong? So when I address your needs, and every single time, without debate, without caveat, your needs come before my rights. Okay? Every single time. But smart money is oftentimes your wants and your likes come before mine too. But I'm not giving in, I'm not giving up, I'm just giving. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity and is not contingent that you deserve being loved. We'll do it one more time. People are taking notes. Love is the intentional. That's a choice, it's an attitude. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. I'm going to do something for you that costs me something, not because I'm giving in or giving up, just simply because I'm giving. And it doesn't require reciprocity. This is not one of those things I do for you, you do for me. When you teach love languages, or you teach his needs, her needs, that is not taught from a quid pro quo standpoint that if you do your job, they'll do your job. No, I do my job because it's my job. Period. You've heard it said by those of old, you shall love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy, bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, in order that, what? You get invited to the barbecue, you'll be voted as the president of the HOA, your kids will be popping. No. In order that you may be sons of your Father. I treat you the way I treat you because of an internal ethos that says I'm a God person. And as a child of God, this is how I treat you. I don't treat you in a way that elicits a response from you. It does not consider reciprocity. And I treat you with love even when you don't deserve it. Now let me chase a rabbit real fast. If I set boundaries and if I set limits on bad behavior, whether it's kids or an adult, and I expect my boundaries to change your behavior, that's just manipulation. You get that? The reason boundaries and tough love doesn't work is because in the back of my mind, I'm going to do this, so you'll do that. No. I'm going to do this. And it has zero to do with your behavior. My boundaries control how I respond to your behavior. They don't change your behavior. But if my boundaries are designed to change your behavior, then that's just manipulation and control. And that's why sometimes we think, well, I gave to you, you'll give to me. No, I give to you because that's what I do. And I give to you because I have an understanding that these are your needs, and these are your wants, and these are your likes. And understanding my spouse's worldview, how they view this as important or not important, as essential or non-essential, changes the way I respond to those things. Now, in an ideal relationship, I attune to my spouse and my spouse attunes to me. But really, it doesn't matter whether my spouse attunes or not. That's my job. Why? Because love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another does not require reciprocity and is not contingent on whether or not you deserve it. When I said I do, I do. And that's it. Love is an attitude more than it is an emotion. And the reason we fail at this is because somehow we've got into this thing that your behavior gives me permission to behave in a certain way, or your lack of effort allows me to have lack of effort. That's not what love is about. You're allowed to act that way when you're dating. And anything you want to use as a deal breaker in dating, you're willing to out. A buddy of mine, Tim Orbison, talks about the marriage go-round. The marriage go-round starts at romance. And then romance runs into reality. And reality can become recycle, or you can live with regret. Okay? And so romance is the idea where everything is beautiful. We see the red flags, they're just different colors, or we see the red flags and we just assume that they're beautiful blowing in the breeze. You know, in the romance stage, the young lady may say, well, my boyfriend is a foreign national, and he's unencumbered by the mores of a capitalistic society. That's how they feel like when they're dating. Then they're married, and it's reality. He's an illegal alien and he's unemployed. That's what that fancy terminology meant at the first of this thing. And now that I'm living with this bum, and he can't get a job, and he won't get a job, I'm going to recycle him. I'm going to get somebody new. And you go through that every time somebody's imperfect, you just throw them out with the bathwater. Or you go, you know what? I'm just going to suck it up. Here's a glass to get over it. Here's a straw to suck it up, and I'm going to live miserable. What the Bible teaches is that we move from romance to reality, and there's passages all over the New Testament that talk about how people get along in the church. Ephesians 4 and Colossians 3, Romans 12, that we give credence to the idea that I'm an imperfect person. I married an imperfect person. We gave birth to a person. When she got old enough, she became imperfect. I live on a street with imperfect people. I go to church with imperfect people. I work with imperfect people, and I'm self-employed. I'm the only dude there. We understand we have the capacity for imperfection, but when somebody becomes imperfect, what do? That's a deal breaker. Now there's a difference between inconsistent and being hypocritical. I'm talking about normal inconsistency, that I'm an imperfect person. Well, what happens when romance, I married somebody, and right now, because I'm Twitter-pated, they're perfect, comes into reality. I married somebody who has the capacity for imperfection, and they live up to it. Well, I can live with regret, or I can recycle it, or I can move through some skill building. I can renovate. I can do some things where I build what I call the covenant mindset. And so the covenant mindset is having love at the top of this. Remember the food pyramid in the 5th grade? By the way, that thing's been proven to be wrong, badly wrong. But in the 5th grade, you had this 3-sided, if you could draw that pyramid, that's $1 a pop, by the way, if you're a mercenary cartoonist. I made a lot of money in the 5th grade because nobody could make that third leg on their triangle. Okay? And then it had 4 layers. I don't remember what the 4 layers was. Ice cream, pizza, French fries, and donuts. I don't remember what it was. Okay? But at the top of that thing is love. The intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment to the good of another. It's attitude more than it is emotion. You can't have that without intimacy. And intimacy is that understanding of your needs, your worldview, your likes, your love languages, all those kind of things. It's that connectedness. Biblical math is not 1 and 1 equals 2. It's not 2 halves equal a whole. And by the way, if you're going into marriage with 2 halves equal a whole, you've announced you're a fixer-upper. All right? You want a partner, not a project in your relationships. And you can't have love unless you've got intimacy. And that's not just physical intimacy, but that's a psychic and an emotional intimacy. And you can't have intimacy unless you have trust. And trust is built on the concept of selfishness. Now, most people never think about that. Most people have never articulated that. But you think about the person on this planet that you trust the most, and you'll realize that person's not selfish. And you think about the person on this planet that gives you the creeps, and you wouldn't trust them with anything, and they typically behave selfishly. When you walk into your marriage, and it's about me and my, not we and our, you walk into a marriage going, I'm being selfish. And if you're selfish, you've undergirded, you've destroyed the foundation of being able to build trust. And without trust, you can't have intimacy. And without intimacy, you can't have that attitude of love. And that undergirding, that am I selfish or am I not selfish, deals with attunement. Am I willing to respond to the world based on your perspective? Am I willing to respond to the world based on your view of things? And so often we are so egocentric and we're so selfish that we have trouble doing that. When you start thinking about love languages, it's not about you understanding my love language, it's about me understanding yours and responding to it. And when I understand your worldview and you feel like I get you, we don't have very many conflicts about very many things. Now remember, it's got to be giving. Not giving in or giving up, but just plain giving in order to avoid some of those conflicts. And so attunement is the ability to say, I understand your world. John Gottman calls it love mapping. You have conversations with people to find out what their hopes and dreams and insecurities and all those things are. And once I understand that and can respond to it, I see the world through your eyes and I simply respond to that. Michelle Davis, in her TED Talk on the sex-starved marriage, says that the person in the marriage who is least interested in sex controls it. You think about that as a truism. The person in the marriage who's least interested in sex controls it. Now, what does that do for your dynamic? This is super important to one person, and it's a with another person. Right? What happens to this person that it's super important to, and this person says, well, it's a Who's got the power to give here? Now, I'm going to go ahead and just take a left turn. That's actually a right turn, but it's left for you. I'm going to take a left turn. The person in your congregation who is the most rigidly conservative controls your congregation. And that's if they're sitting in your elders, or if they're that person who writes the elders' letters and says, I'm against it. Because the person who is least interested in progress and the person who is least interested in growth and the person who's least interested in innovation says, nope, I got the ability to kill this. If it's unhealthy in a marriage, it's also unhealthy in a church. But in a marriage, If I'm not interested in traveling, if I'm not interested in going to see your parents, if I'm not interested in a vacation at the beach, and I'm not interested in shopping, but you are, and your ability to go and do is contingent on my interest in it, we're in an unfavorable dynamic because you're never going to get to do any of that. Suppose my wife got to shop as much as I was interested in it. Well, I'd be a millionaire. Told this lady at Walmart I was paying with cash. She goes, nobody pays with cash anymore. I said, well, somebody stole my credit card. She goes, oh, I'm sorry. I said, he spends less than my wife. I didn't turn it in. She didn't know what to do with that. But if she shopped based on my interest, she wouldn't do it. If I deer hunted based on her interest, we'd be overpopulated by deer right now. They'd be running into your gardens and eating salad off the table because she's not going to go. She's not going to get up in the dark. She's not going to get up when it's cold. Done. Not happening. Well, you think about in a marriage that this is important to me, but it's not important to you, and you get to control it. Again, not giving in, not giving up, but simply giving. And if you don't know the love languages, it's physical touch, quality time, gifts, acts of service, and words of admiration. And depending on how your spouse sees the world, one of those things, they hear, I love you when you do that. About 5 minutes. And so attuning to your spouse's needs is simply getting to know, hey, this is really important to you. And it may not be important to me, but because it's not important to me doesn't mean it's not important. And understanding my spouse's needs always trump. I'm always going to give your needs come above my rights. But a lot of times your wants will come in front of my wants because I'm fairly negotiable on that. And then your likes will oftentimes trump my likes because I want to do things so that we have this connection, we have this intimacy. And so when you start talking about attunement, it's simply the idea that God decided to live in our experience so He could understand us and respond to us. Because when we come to God in time of need and we need mercy and we need help, God says, I understand that. And I can give you grace and help in the time of need. We always think that we have this relationship with God when we're perfect. No, God says you come to me with boldness when you need grace and help in the time of need. I'm not doing this very well, God. I need help. And God says, I understand that. Because I walked in your bodies, I walked on your feet, I felt your feelings, I experienced your experiences, I endured your temptations. And so God turns to us. And that's how God is able to love us and forgive us. Guess what happens when I'm able to experience the world through my spouse's feelings? I can turn to them, and they don't have to be perfect, but I can address them when they come to me in time of help, when they need grace, they need mercy, or they just simply need their needs met. And meeting my spouse's needs from their standpoint, addressing my spouse's wants, and addressing my spouse's likes from their standpoint is the ultimate formula for fixing a marriage so that we're not in competition, but we're in cooperation. Questions or comments? The Relationship Cure by John Gottman, Why Marriages Succeed or Fail by John Gottman, and then The Science of Trust. All those things are contained in that book. Thank you guys for inviting me to speak, and look forward to speaking some more. Thank you, Justin.
It's fantastic, and we appreciate Lonnie's efforts. We've got some great classes. Ted, I believe I told you when you were back there, you're actually going to be in here. I think I see Ted, so I've got that backwards. So we got some breakout classes to attend. We have Ben Hayes, who will be in our old fellowship classroom, Fireproofing Your Marriage, Building Blocks of a Godly Marriage. Ted, he'll be in here. And then our ladies class, Sister Betty Hamlin, will be in our library. And so you're dismissed this time. We got coffee and donuts, and yes, you can take coffee in whatever room you want to take it in. There's some cakes and those types of things. If you want to grab those on your way through, you're more than welcome to do so.
didn't actually